All right, Chavra, are we ready over here? Wow. Kuf Nun Zayin Dafin. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Zayin, thus making a siyum on the Masechta. We left off on Daf Kuf Nun Vav Amid Beis. We learned yesterday the Mishnah, second to last Mishnah, that records another application of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon regarding muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda has a broader application for muktzah, more machmir, versus Rabbi Shimon has a narrower application of muktzah. The Gemara is going to begin to record various amoraim, some of which sides with Rabbi Yehuda, paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, others paskin like Rabbi Shimon. We're going to learn again the rule that Rabbi Yochanan says halachic is tam Mishnah. However, but we're going to have something which is gewaldik on Daf Kuf Nun Zayin, is that whenever the Mishnah records a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, even though it's not a stam Mishnah means that Rabbeinu HaKadosh quotes an opinion without attributing it to anyone. When Rebbe puts a machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel down in a Mishnah, based on the rule that Beis Shammai, the Markim Beis Hillel, Einoi Mishnah, it's Ki'ilu, this is called a Stam Mishnah. Not only by the fact that Rebbe is quoting Beis Hillel, even if there's a machlokes in the Mishnah, still this is called a Stam Mishnah, and we'll see how this will be relevant for our discussion. We're going to learn the final Mishnah in the Masechta that's going to speaks about Hafaras Nadarim, Hataras Nadarim on Shabbos. And finally, the final three dinim will be the Mishnah's psak that Poikikin, Umoidedin, V'Koishin, B'Shabbos, as we will explain. In the Gemara, we're going to learn various halachas of Tumas oil, and we will conclude the Masechta by sharing a story of a Rabba Barafuna who had a conversation with Ula while Rabba Barafuna was in the house, was in the property of the Reish Golusa. With that, let us start inside. We left off on Nafkuf Nun Vav Amid Beis in the beginning of the Gemara, which is 9 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Okay, so now that we had in the Mishnah another application of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, so Itmar, and here we have in the parentheses the mnemonic, which is a siman to the names of the Amoraim that we will be bringing down as to did they side with Rabbi Yehuda or with Rabbi Shimon. Orel Shachaz, really it's Orel Shazach. The Marshal Bechlal takes out the siman. Be that as it may, let's begin with the ayin with Ula. Omar Ula. Ula says the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel, well, the Marshal takes out the next statement. Shmuel, who says halacha Rabbi Shimon, is removed here from the Marshal, not because it's not correct, it's correct, but because we're going to learn soon about Shmuel who paskins like Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going with the Amoraim that paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So all says halacha Rabbi Yehuda. And how do we know that? There were ship mats. It means when people traveled on the ships and there were cargo, so there were certain mats that were used to cover the cargo. So this is another great example of where we will see an application of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Are those mats muktzah? Well, according to the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that if they were not designated to be used for Shabbos for you, they are automatically muktzah. Those mats were actually were put on top of cargo. So they were not muchend for your usage. So they're muktzah. According to Shmuel, no one, the Fedish, was maktzia these mats from being used for anything else. Yeah, it was left on top of the cargo. But according to Rab Shimon, it will not be muktzah. Rab said that you cannot use those mats on Shabbos to use them to sit down on them or for any other usage. Shmuel says that you could. By the way, here's already from where you see that Shmuel Taka holds like Rab Shimon. If an animal was shechted on Yom Tov, and as we keep on learning, this is another example. An animal before Yom Tov was generally designated L'Maichel Adam. Now it's shechted on Yom Tov. Now, obviously, if the shechita comes out good, Kula Alma, you can eat an animal that was shechted on Yom Tov. But what happens if the animal turns out to be a treifa? Now, when you have an avela or a treifa, a person who would have animals would feed it to the animals. Question is, can you feed it to the animals on Yom Tov? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot. Because since this animal prior to Yom Tov was designated L'Maichel Adam, that means it was not muchan, it was not set aside L'Maichel Behema, then it's muktzah as far as Maichel Behema is concerned. According to Rab Shimon, it was not, you did not decide that you will never give it to animals. No, it was, you were not matzia it. You thought you're going to eat it. But if it turns out to be treifa, according to Rab Shimon, it's not muktzah. Now, when an animal was brought to Levi, for Levi to paskin whether the animal is treifa or not, Levi did not want to do what he normally does, which is that you take the animal in your hand, you take that animal part in your hand, and you look at it. Why did he not want to do it? Because since Levi, as we'll see, paskins, like Rabbi Yehuda, if it's going to turn out that the animal indeed is treif, which means according to Rabbi Yehuda, the animal is muktzah, he didn't even want to have it in his hand. So what did he do? He wanted to be sitting already on top of a garbage heap. The animal was put in a location that if Levi would determine that it's treif, it's already in the garbage. In other words, he would not have to move it. Now, if you remember, we mentioned above, and indeed the halacha is that if muktzah is already in your hand, then you can move it around. So either Levi Bechlal did not subscribe to that, or the level of muktzah that this would have rendered to be Lashitas Rabbi Yehuda, if the animal would have been treif, would be such a level of muktzah that even if you have it in your hand, you may not move it around. So his solution was already put it in a place where it can remain there if it's treif. The Amar, he says, Dilma lemiskashiram, it might not turn to be kosher, and therefore, since I hold like Rabbi Yehuda on Yom Tov, Shmuel, however, now we're going to quote the Amiroim, right? The Shachaz or the Shazach that hold like Rabbi Shimon. Shmuel holds halachic Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara doesn't have to say a proof because we just brought above about the Kerach and the Zuzeh that Shmuel allowed people to use those mats that covered cargo on Shabbos for things other than it remaining on top of the cargo. Now that's the Zayin from the Zach, Shazach. The Avzi holds like Rab Shimon. How do we know that? Because the Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah in Beitzam, the Heba Shemesam, if an animal dies on Yom Tov, don't move it from its place. Now, this is mamish, right? Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Shimon. So if I kept, you would think, because now that it died, it became an avela on Yom Tov. Before Yom Tov, you could have shechted it. Before Yom Tov, it was designated L'Maichel Adam. Now it turned into Maichel Behema, L'Rabbi Yehuda Tzmuktzah. However, comes along Z'id and he says, no. Since we see Z'idi holds like Rab Shimon, he wanted this Mishnah to go even according to Rab Shimon. So Z'idi explained and he limited, he qualified this Mishnah that it's only speaking about the Hemas Kachim. Now Kachim is different because Kachim, B'chlal, can never be used for anything other than for Kachim. So of course, Behemas Kachim is Muktzah and Yom Tov. But why did he say that? Because according to Zeiri, who paskins like Rab Shimon, wanting the Mishnah to be according to Rab Shimon, if an animal dies on Yom Tov, The animal is not muktzah. Now feed it to animals. Before Yom Tov, it was designated more l'maychal adam. So what? You never decided that you will never give it under no circumstances to an animal. So you are not maktzia if it's not muktzah. Aval b'chulin shaper dami. And now the final amayda of Af Rabbi Yechanan holds that halacha is like Rab Shimon. And on this, we're going to have a lot of pushback, which is, how can you tell me that Rabbi Yechanan says halacha ki Rab Shimon umi amar Rabbi Yechanan hachi v'ha amar Rabbi Yechanan, as we learned on Daf Mem Vav, that halacha ki stam Mishnah, that's his rule. Stam Mishnah means whenever Rabbi gives a din in a Mishnah without telling you who said it, if that din is really only according to one of various opinions, that's Rabbeinu HaKadosh's way of saying this is the halacha. Now, where do we have a Stam Mishnah that somehow is based on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? Uvetanan, Daf Kuf Nun Zayin, and we're going to be quoting various Mishnayos, all from a Sechtes Beitza. So we're beginning over here. It says in the Mishnah in Beitza, Ein Mevaken Eitzen Min HaKoros, you're not allowed to split wood from beams. Now, beams are normally designated for construction. Here we're speaking about someone who wants to take a part of a beam and use it for fuel, for firewood on Yom Tov. Now, of course, you can add to fire on Yom Tov. The question is, were these beams prior to Yom Tov muchand for firewood? Now, did you ever decide that you will never use it for firewood? No. Again, this is a case where, depending whether you go like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Shimon, with Rabbi Yehuda, it was designated for construction. So can you now use it for firewood? According to Rabbi Yehuda only, you may not. Likewise, if you have a beam that broke on Yom Tov, okay, the beam now is no longer fit for construction. So now again, you want to use it for firewood. Here again, this will really depend on Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And the Mishnah, without attributing Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, stop. The Mishnah says that no, so the problem is, this is a Stam Mishnah. This should have forced, so to say, Rabbi Yechanan to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Answers the Gemara. Rabbi Yechanan's girsa in that Mishnah was not like ours. Rabbi Yechanan, when Rabbi Yechanan learned this Mishnah in Cheder, that Mishnah concluded Divrei Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda. We don't have those words, so that's it. There's no more question on Rabbi Yechanan. Next question. Tashemam, another Mishnah in Beitza. Mishnah says that maschilen ba'arei masateven, that if you have a stack of straw, now a stack of straw here, which is normally designated for animal feed, but here the Mishnah is speaking about a stack of straw that became decayed, that became spoiled, and it became spoiled before Yom Tov. So this liner will be, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, since it's no longer fit for animal food, so for sure the owner said, well, the only other option is to use it for fuel. So since it was already muchan for fuel from before Yom Tov, so if you want to begin opening up a new pekele for fuel on Yom Tov, no problem. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's okay. Awal, here is the thing of the Mishnah. Guys, muktzah, as we're learning, muktzah. In this Mishnah in Beitza, muktzah refers to a location on your property. Many people who have houses in Los Angeles and there's a back house and then there is an area behind your back house. It's a location that you hardly ever go to. And what do you use that location for? Anything that you want to use for long-term storage, you put in your muktzah. Set it aside. So anything that's in that location, which means that you left it in there before for long-term storage, again, were you matzia? You will dafka not use it? No. According to Rabbi Shimon, it won't be muktzah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, something that's put in a long-term storage location automatically becomes muktzah. And indeed, the Mishnah says, Stam Mishnah, you cannot take wood out of your muktzah, out of your storage. Stam Mishnah ki Rabbi Yehuda. Answers the Gemara, no. Over there, says Rabbi Yechanan, or says the Gemara to Farem for Rabbi Yechanan, we're speaking about what was stored in the muktzah, not stam wood, but arze, cedar beams, or ashuche, another type of ashuche beams, which are very expensive woods These are woods that even according to the Tanach Rab Shimon, you never will use this for fuel. Like you don't waste expensive construction material for fuel. The muktzah machmas chisaron kis, and therefore I feel Rab Shimon moide that it's muktzah. So from that Mishnah goes to Kula Alma. It's a stam Mishnah. Kula Alma doesn't question Rabbi Yechina. Another question now on Rabbi Yechina. Tashemam again from Beitza. It says a mashkin v'sheichten asamid bariyos. Now mashkin is a eitza toiva that before you shecht an animal that you would like to skin after the shechita, what facilitates skinning an animal is having that animal drink a lot of liquid right before the shechita. Right? That's why we learned that in the Bayis Rishon, the troughs in the Bayis Rishon that were used to be mashkin, the behemoths before the shechita, were made out of gold. I'm just saying that mashkin is not the key here. The key here is shechting. Midbariyos are animals that roam out far away from the city, and they do not return that often. So they are owned by you, but they're called midbariyos because they hang out in the midbar. Now here's another example. Is the animal that you own, but they are midbariyos, can you shech them on Yontif? If they happen to come back to your property, can you shech them? According to Rab Shimon, yeah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, no. Because they were not muchen, because as far as you know, before Yontif, they were muchal not be here. And the Mishnah says, ein mashkin v'shoichet es ha-midbariyos. However, avol mashkin v'shoichet es ha-bayosois, from the word bayis, the ones that live closer. That means that you knew that they might come back, right? Doesn't mean that they live in your house, but they live so close that they return almost every night. Again, this din l'chura is only according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rab Shimon, a animal, even if the animal is a midbariyos animal, if it happens to return on Yontiv, yes, you can shecht it on Yontiv. It's a stam Mishnah, and Rabbi Yechina should have to paskin like it. And the Gemara here has no response. Truth, yes, this Mishnah in Beitza is a stam ki Rabbi Yehuda. Why didn't Rabbi Yechina therefore paskin like Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yechina stomachina ashkach, that there's another stam Mishnah. Now here, Rabbi Yechanan gets to pick, because even though you use the rules, halachic stam Mishnah, one stam Mishnah Beitza paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. There's another stam Mishnah which happens to be from the Masechta Shabbos, paskins like Rab Shimon. Rabbi Yechanan paskins like the Shabbos dika stam Mishnah. Like we mentioned in the introduction, this is a gavaldik thing that we're learning today. Don't think we're going to quote a Mishnah that doesn't quote Memres. No, it's a Mishnah that quotes Beishamai and Beisilul. And this is the Mishnah from Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, Beishamai oimrim magbiyin ma'al hashulchan atzomai zu klippen. I know we learned Rashi and Tosfos. Let's quote Tosfos, which is easier to understand. We're speaking about nutshells, bones and nutshells that are Michael, that now are fit to be consumed by animals. But before Shabbos, they were inside a product. They were inside an animal, they were inside a fruit. Then that fruit was designated the Michael Adam. So here again is a great example. Something was originally designated the Michael Adam. During Shabbos or Yontif, it turned into Michael Behema. Is it Muktzah or not? So Beishamai says it's not Muktzah, which means according to the version that we have in our Mishnah, Beishamai holds leniently like Rab Shimon. Beisilul, according to this version, is Punkta Machmed, and he says that they are Muktzah. And therefore, if you want to clean the table, you may not directly take them in your hand. What do you need to do? The salik as a tabla, you got to pick up the whole board. Or today it would be pick up the whole tablecloth, kula, and then shake it off. Which means, according to our version, Beisilul holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And on that, we learned in the Gemara on Kuf Mem Gimel, that's Amar Rav Nachman, Onu Ein Lanu Elo Beishamai Kedivid Rabbi Yehuda, U Beisilul Ke Rab Shimon. You have the version in the reverse order. Actually, since based on the fact that in Masechtas Eiduyos, when the Mishnah there is putting together the anomaly of Beisilul being the Machmed, this is not quoted. That's an ayah to Rav Nachman that you have the version in the opposite order. Beisilul is the Mekel. Beisilul follows Rab Shimon, or to really chronologically, the Tanach Rab Shimon follows Beisilul. So look, and that's the end of that. Amazing. So as Rashi points out, as the other Rishonim also point out, since Beishamai b'Markan Beisilul is Eile Mishnah, this is called a Stam Mishnah. So guys, we're learning a big cloud today, that every time in Mishnayos we have a Machlekes Beishamai Beisilul, that Mishnah is called a Stam Mishnah. Even though we're quoting Beis Hillel because there was a Beis Shammai. But now that we completely halachically ignore Beis Shammai, so it's keila we don't even need to write Divrei Beis Hillel. So it's a Stam Mishnah. Stam Mishnah that you can move these atzamas, you can move these klipas. So now Rabbi Yochanan Paskin's like our Stam Mishnah. Okay. Now, when it comes to the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, benegea only muksa. I'm not even talking about all the other malacha she'en tzricha legufa, davar she'en mischaven. We're speaking about muksa. There's other cases of muksa, specific muksas where they had a machlokes that we learned above. On Daf Mem Dalid, we had a muksa machmas mius, a utensil that is pashut. It's disgusting. It was a lamp that was prior to Shabbos, was used already once, these earthenware small lamps. There's no fire in it when Shabbos came in, but it's not that normally people would only use it to light a candle. What happens if you would like to use this on Shabbos for something else? Another machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda's machman, he says no, it wasn't muchan to be used because it's disgusting. And Rabbi Shimon holds no, that you could use it. Another machlokes we had above is muksa machmas isur. Right, we're going even earlier on in the Masechta, and that is if you had, when Shabbos came in, you had a lamp, and the lamp was used. So while a fire is burning in a keli lekula alma, you can't move that. Right, we even learned Zaydi, you can't even read near it shemayata. What happens after the candle goes out? Now there's no more oil. Can you use it for something else? So when Shabbos came in, it was then part of a lamp. No. But during Shabbos, there's no more Isur. The reason for it becoming Asur left, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Migol de Iskatsoi lebein hashmashos Iskatsoi for the whole Shabbos. According to Rabbi Shimon, we learned above, you could use it now that there's nothing else muksa in it. So these are two other arguments, minimally, that the Gemara is going to be addressing. On that says the Gemara, Pligebar of Acha v'Ravina, Chad Omar, B'chol HaShabbos Kula, Alocha Ki Rabbi Shimon. Now, B'chol HaShabbos Kula is referring to minimally all of the arguments regarding muksa, aside of muksa machmas mius. I mentioned also muksa machmas isur. Just a halt cut, my friends, that when the Gemara says aside of muksa machmas mius, kol shchein, it also includes that we don't pasken like Rab Shimon by muksa machmas isur, which is more chamur, as the Gemara will explain. But here we're saying that by all Shabbos we pasken like Rab Shimon aside of these two muksas. Then we pasken like Rabbi Yehuda. I want you to know that some of the Rishonim learned that when it says B'chol HaShabbos Kula, it's not only by muksa, it's also by malacha she'en tzricha legufa. It's also by davar she'en eschaven. But that's a big machlokes Rishonim, all the way into a halacha lamaisa. Are we referring to only muksa machlokesin, or are we referring to all the other arguments that we had? And indeed, going way back, when I was not well, when Danny was learning the sugi over there, he mentioned, and I hope I repeated this a few times already, that all of the arguments between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon come from the same nekuda. And that is that Rabbi Shimon, Stam Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right, was the one that was the master in Pnimius HaTorah. So he looked at the Hanastaros, which is why the Kavana is of greater significance. Rabbi Shimon, which is why he's more lenient if it's davar she'ein eschaven, if it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Right? All of this is linked. Same thing regarding over here. If you were not explicitly maktzia it, in other words, your intentions are of much greater significance, according to Rabbi Shimon, who is again the master of the hidden. So actually, that's how many Rishonim paskin, that we paskin like everything like Rabbi Shimon. By malacha she'en tzricha legufa, that it's only yasser. By davar she'ein mischaven, if it's not psikresha, it's completely mutter. And by muksa, like Rabbi Shimon, aside of muksa machmas mios, and for sure muksa machmas isur, uman niu, what's the case of muksa machmas mios? A ned yashan. Ned yashan means that when Shabbos came in, there was no fire in there. But since it was used before, it's not, most people would not use it for anything else.
Rabbi, what's an example of muksa machmas isur?
I'll give you again. Even by muksa machmas mius, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. The only time we pass like Rabbi Yehuda, levar mi muksa machmas isur, and for tzemach uman mihu ner shedliku ba ba'isur Shabbos. Not a ner nashim. not a Ner Yoshem. No, when Shabbos came in, you had a keli that had oil, that had a wick, that had a fire burning. That means when Shabbos came in, during Bein HaShmoshes, you were not allowed to move it l'kula alma, because it was part of a fire, right? Now, after a few hours, the fire burnt out. Now, why were you not allowed to move it when Shabbos came in? Because the fire was burning. That reason went away. Says Rabbi Yehuda, since it was muksa Bein HaShmoshes, it remains muksa for the whole Shabbos. Says Rab Shimon, no, now that the reason went away, now it's no longer muksa. Here is the only time that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. And by the way, we taka paskin here like Rabbi Yehuda. We do say that if something, for example, was a basis l'davar ha'asur by Bein HaShmoshes, it remains muksa for the whole Shabbos. And not, now there's no more isur on it. We don't say that. So we keep on mentioning that if you want to remove your leichters, which the leichters should be on the Shabbos table, right? And you want to later be able to move out the whole tray, you got to make sure that when you light the candles, you put something else on the tray. You got to make sure that the tray is a basis l'davar ha'asur and to a chashiv l'davar hamuter. Because if not, even after the fires go out, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, you won't be able to move it. Aval muktzah machmas rechas is afilu Rab Shimon moide bitnan kol hakelim. In other words, there is one case that muktzah machmas chesron is there is no machloikas there. Just to be aware of that. So we can take a paskin like Rab Shimon, but we'll have to be machmer nonetheless because Rab Shimon himself is machmer. As we learned, bitnan. Kol hakelim l'tolam b'Shabbos, chutz mimasor hagadol, a large saw. Or another example is a yosei shel machareshe kolter. These are various kelim that were used in someone's parnasa. And here, being that they were chashuv and they were expensive, their owners would never allow you to use it for anything other than their designated malacha. That even according to Rab Shimon, that's pshat that you, before Shabbos, you decided that this will not be used because you can't use a masar hagadol b'chlal, you can't build. You can't use a yosei shel machresha, you can't be chodesh. So you taka were matzia it from it being used. Rab Shimon also subscribes to muksa. This is muksa, more narrower, but this muksa, we can paskin like Rab Shimon l'kula. Nonetheless, this will remain muksa. Okay, final Mishnah. Mefirin nedarim de Shabbos. A quick recap on Hilchas Nedarim. You have Hafaras Nedarim and Hataras Nedarim. As the Torah already uses these different words, Hafaras Nedarim is the koyach, the right, and the power that God Almighty gives a father over his daughter, a husband vis-a-vis his wife. By the way, father and daughter, just to appreciate, it's not that there's only a certain age that if she's not yet that age, can the father be meifir the neder of his daughter. On the other hand, if the daughter is very young, then her nedarim are not valid b'chlal. So the hafaras nedarim from a father over a daughter is a very small window of time. Husband and wife has no such window. That if the husband hears about the neder that his wife made, it's not about when she made it, it's about when the husband heard her neder. So the Torah says that there is miyoim liyoim, there is a day which will define later what that means, whether the day means the calendar day, whether the day is a 24-hour period, that nedarim, with all of the tanoim, it's not any neder, we'll learn a lot more nedarim, but certain nedarim, the husband has the koyach to nullify, and when he does so, it's a retroactive nullification, and the words that are used is hafara. Then there is something else. Anyone who makes a neder, if they go to a beis din, which is either a yachid that's a mumcha, or 3 even hadyotos, and that person gives a pesach, the person explains that if I would have known X, Y, and Z, I never would have made the neder. So the beis din has the koyach to be matir the neder. That's called hataras nedarim. But being that the beis din has to find a pesach, so the verbiage, the word that this Mishnah uses is not atara, but it's nishalin. Nishalin means that you have to ask a person, if you would have known that this would have happened, would you would have made the neder? So it's called nishalin, but it means ataras nedarim. So the Mishnah says like this: you could be made for nedarim on Shabbos. Now we don't know exactly where to put the comma, as I'll explain in a moment. And the Mishnah continues, v'nishalin l'nedarim, and you can be mated, a basin can be mated and neder, but here the Mishnah is giving a limit. Now, whether this limit is only going on nishalin, or whether this limit is also going on the hafara, I'll explain that better in a moment. Well, that's a question the Gemara is going to address. But let's keep on reading. But which nadarim can a basin be mated only if they are l'tzoyrech Shabbos? If it's a neder that it makes no difference today whether the neder will stand or not. So let's go with the shita of the Ran, that hataras nadarim for that is called a unnecessary tircha, or tircha yiseira, because it's not necessary. So midrabanan you can't do that. So therefore there has to be a tzorech Shabbos. Now the question is, let's say the husband to the wife, do you need the tzorech Shabbos for the husband to be allowed to be mefer? So it's like really all one clause, or mefinim nadarim Shabbos kama, and mefinim nadarim Shabbos is no matter whether it is l'tzorech or not. Why is it not considered an unnecessary tircha? I'll explain in the Gemara. It might not be. He might not have any other opportunity other than today. So it's not called it's necessary for him to be mefer. Or the tzorech Shabbos goes on both. We'll clarify that in the Gemara. And the final dinim of the Mishnah, poiki kinas hamor, daf kuf chafei. We had a machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. And that question was, when you want to shutter a window. So if the shutters, like our shutters, are already connected to the window, or even in the times of Chazal, that they would simply affix it to a rope. And if the shutter, when it was not in the window, when the window was open, but if the shutter was hanging from the rope and it wasn't even on the ground, so it was already part of the building, and whoever looked at it saw that it's part of the building, then according to everyone, you can shutter the window, you can close the window, and you can open the window. Okay? It's not, Rashi writes in Kuf Chafei Amud Beis, it's not mechse kaboina. However, we're speaking about a shutter that's not connected at all. Benkach or benkach, very lenient. It's not only is it on a rope and it's on the ground, it's not connected. What would be the issue of you putting in this board to shutter the window or taking off the board? Whether there is a mechse kabinyan, whether it's part of boina, maybe not midoraisa, maybe midrabanan. The Chachamim hold, we learned above that it's not. And as the Gemara made a statement that if you're doing what we called an oil arai, that was the oil arai, and you're only being moisiv to oil arai, which will be the case over here if the window is in a skylight, for example. So yeah, even though you're making an oil, a mechitza b'chlal is not a problem. Even if it's an oil, there's already a roof. Elama, there's a part of the roof that's open with the window. So what are you doing? You're adding to the roof. You remember we spoke about if you have a baby carriage, and maybe many baby carriages, they have this thing on top of it, that if it's too sunny or if it's rainy, you can open something up. That's a classical example of there's already some covering. You want to add to the covering. You're being moisiv al oil, and it's arai.
It's called a hood.
A hood, thank you. So the din is that you are allowed to do it lachatchila. You can be moisiv on oil arai. And then we mentioned, Shleba asked, what about an umbrella? That's where we spoke about the truth of the Noida Yehuda, which is a fascinating topic, right? But coming back, the Mishnah here is paskening like the Chachamim and Daf Kuf Chafei, that you are allowed to shutter a window, because there is no problem with adding to an oil or to an inyan or to a binyan if it's arai. And another din, there is an Isur Midrabanan of measuring. Measuring on Shabbos is connected to uvda dechoil. However, if you're doing it l'tzoyrech mitzvah, you are allowed to do it. And the last Tosfos in the Masechta is going to say that the poike kinas hamor does not need to be l'tzoyrech mitzvah. There's no problem with adding to an oil at all. The next line is only for a mitzvah. Measuring shaloi l'tzoyrech mitzvah for a purpose is uvda dechoil. But if there is a mitzvah related, now what's that mitzvah related? He's giving an example. Mitzvah related doesn't mean that you're fulfilling a direct mitzvah. Mitzvah related will mean that you want to know whether a certain garment is tamei. To know that if it's tamei and I touch something else, that item will also become tamei. This is called mitzvah related. So the example the Mishnah gives is you have a matlis. A matlis, we had this way earlier on, is a small patch. It's a small garment. if the fibers are wool or linen, even if it's only 3 by 3 finger breadths, and by the way, a finger breadth is the width of a thumb, it's considered already a beged that is able to become tamei and sometimes impart tuma. And you had such a garment that became tamei, but now some of it fell apart and only a little piece of it is left. Now, if it fell apart to the point that no piece of this patch has 3 by 3, it automatically loses its tuma. But you don't know whether it became that small. You don't know whether it lost its tuma. So you can measure the matlas by using your thumbs to see whether it still has the minimum shiur, so it retained its tuma or not. Or another example of measuring, if you have a mikvah, and in those days, since you need to have 40 sa, which is the minimum of kosher waters, so if you have a amma by an amma, by the height of 3 ammas, that exactly is 40 sa. So someone had such a contraption, but you don't know, maybe it was not an amma by the height of 3 ammas, maybe it was a drop less. Can you measure it? Again, is it a mitzvah? No, but it's l'tzoyrech mitzvah, because if you can establish that this is a kosher mikvah, then you want to go to the mikvah every Shabbos morning, Keminik Chasidim, especially when there's an inyan of Tefillas Ezra. That's called l'tzoyrech mitzvah, and you can measure the size to figure out whether they have the memsa. And now the Mishnah says, and we already learned many times that whenever Rebbe gives a din, and then he tells you a story, that's Rabbeinu HaKadosh's way of saying this is the halacha. It was the Maisa is to paskin. Umaisa b'mei Aviv Shal Rav Tzadik, u'b'mei Abba Shal Ben Batnes in their times, and the story will be written out in the Gemara, but shepaku kues hamoed b'tofiach, that in order l'tzoyrech mitzvah, they shuttered a window with a tofiach. Tofiach is some sort of flask, and we'll speak out more details in the Gemara, an earthenware flask, that there was an opening in the window and they shut it. Yeah, not permanently, but they didn't even use a shutter. They used something that Bechal was not made for it. They put it into the window, so that's where you see poikikin. And the kosheros hamakeda begemi, they had another smaller earthenware utensil that they were using to measure. And the way they would use that to measure something else is that they tied it with a gemi. A gemi is a reed grass. Now tying, if you remember, a kesher shel kayama is one of the lamates malachas. A kesher she'ein shel kayama. So we also mentioned when we learned the sugya, there is another nuance according to some Rishonim, is you have to know whether it's a kesher of an uman or b'chlal, not a kesher of an uman. Not uman means anyone can make that knot, like tying your shoes. Tying your shoes on Shabbos is mutter, unless you have shoes of the Rabbanan, if you remember. The whole, we quoted the machlekes, what Rashi holds, what other Rishonim hold. Some Rabbanan, they never untied the shoelaces, they left them tied. If you leave them tied for a long time, you have to know what a kayama means, then it might be a problem. But if you tie and untie your shoelaces, you untie your tie, since anyone can do it, if something is ein shel kayama and it's not a ma'aser uman, it's mutter. But what happens if you're making a knot that only a pro can make that knot? But it's ein shel kayama, which was the case over here. That normally is asur midrabanan. However, l'tzoyrech mitzvah, it's mutter. And again, the tzorech mitzvah means, like, if you want to determine whether something is tamei or tahor, that's enough of a tzorech mitzvah. So they took a gemi. Now, a gemi is something that's normally fed to animals. A gemi is also a material that with a short amount of time, it becomes dry. So if you use it as a string or as a rope, for sure it's ein shel kayama. Aleph, you don't want to leave it there. You want to use that to give it to your animals. Right, you're just improvising that temporarily for a purpose, a temporary purpose. And even if you will forget to untie it, to give it to your animals, it by itself will become untied. So this is a case where someone tied a keshed she'ein shel kayama. If there would not be a tzorech mitzvah, because this type of knot is a professional type of knot, it would be problematic. But it was tzorech mitzvah. And what was the tzorech mitzvah? Later to know, im yesh begigis poiseyach tefach. There was a barrel. We'll speak more in the Gemara. And if the barrel had an opening of a tefach, then there would be one halacha. If the barrel did not have an opening of a tefach, there would be another halacha. And how would you know whether a barrel has an opening of a tefach? Well, take a keli that is the size of a tefach and lower it through the hole. If it fits through the hole, that proves that the hole in the barrel has a tefach. That's what they were looking for. If this keli, this mikeda, would not fit through the hole, that would be because the opening in the barrel doesn't have the width of a tefach, so the mikeda doesn't fit through. So they were mamash measuring. Im lav. From the story, we know that yes, shepoikikin umoidedin the koshne b'Shabbos. Poikikin even shaloi l'tzorech mitzvah, and the moidedin and the koshne means a kesher she'ena shel kayama, but it's a ma'aser uman. Normally is asur midrabanan. If it's l'tzorech mitzvah, it could be done. Now this story, and to clarify this, we'll get soon in the Gemara. But first, let's focus on the ratio of the Mishnah. So, like we mentioned, mifirim nedarim b'Shabbos. The Mishnah there didn't say Tzorech Shabbos. The word Tzorech Shabbos was said by the Nishalin. So asks the Gemara that in the yeshiva they wondered, Hafara bein L'Tzorech ben Shaloi L'Tzorech. It's only on the She'ela that L'Tzorech and Shaloi L'Tzorech noi. And that's why Mishamachem Kapalginu Mahadadi. The Mishnah didn't say Mifirin v'Nishalin Nidarim b'Shabbos Shehem L'Tzorech Shabbos. We make two different clauses: Mifirim Nidarim b'Shabbos, and then nishalin. Makes sense why we separated them, because they don't share the same rules. Why didn't Rabbeinu HaKadosh write mefirim v'nishalim? Just to make it clear that it's a whole different system. That hafara, you don't need a beis din. That's the unique, and it's different. And you don't need a beis din. You don't need a pesach. But there's a limited amount of time that the husband can do it. But it's a whole different type of system. And she'ela, you need to have a beis din. And Rashi right away points out beis din doesn't mean what it normally means of 3. Here we know for nedarim, a beis din can even be 1 chacham. Okay, ayin Sanhedrin, the minimum is 3. That's a shem hamushal. For hilchas nedarim, for hataras nedarim, we do use the word beis din, even if there's a yachid mumah. So which one is it? So Tashema, the Tani Zuti, the Vedav Papa, he had a braisa that said clearly, that writes Mefirin Nedarim b'Shabbos, and it writes clearly L'Tzorech Shabbos. That was the end of the braisa. So now the Gemara quotes him. So you see L'Tzorech Shabbos in Shaloi L'Tzorech Shabbos loy. Lishnachrin, another version. Now, what's the deficiency of the first version is? Why would you think that for Hafaras Nedarim you can do it even Shaloi L'Tzorech Shabbos? Why? Let's go with the Ran. The reason why a beis din can only be matir and neder L'Tzorech Shabbos, because if it's not regarding an item that you would benefit using it on Shabbos, so then it's called an unnecessary tircha. If it's not negayat to Shabbos, why are you doing it on Shabbos? Why wouldn't we use the same logic for Hafaras Nedarim? I'll explain why. That's the Lishnachrin. They add that nuance. When the Torah says, let's speak about the husband, that from the day he hears b'yoyim shamay, he has miyoyim liyoyim. So we learned this in Nedarim. It can mean 2 things. Either he has until the end of the calendar day, and if he heard it and he was not mefid, he doesn't have an opportunity, or he has 24 hours. If the husband only has the calendar day, then every single neder is L'Tzorech Shabbos. Why is it L'Tzorech Shabbos? Even if the item that the wife said is not negeya for Shabbos, but since the husband will lose his right to be mefid it Sunday, so you can call that Tzorech Shabbos. You can't say it's unnecessary tircha. It's a necessary tircha. It's necessary. It's his only opportunity. If the Miyoyim Liyoyim means 24 hours, which means that even if the husband won't be mefid it now, he still can do it Motzoi Shabbos. So then, if it's not L'Tzorech Shabbos, then it's unnecessary. So that's really the underlying question behind the Boyer. And that's added in the Lishnachina. The question, the Chetzonistic question is the same in the Lishnachina. Right? In other words, when the Mishnah says by Sheila, L'Tzorech, Ushaloi L'Tzorech Loi, even for Hafaras Nedarim, and why would that be? Because it's unnecessary. Why would that be? Alma Hafaras Nedarim is 24 hours. Dilma, Ki Ketani L'Tzorech only Ashe'elo. Abla Hafaras Nedarim, even if it's not for L'Tzorech Shabbos, the husband could do it. You know why he can do it? Because Alma Hafaras Nedarim is only Kol Hayom, and the word only. So yeah, it's not l'tzaydach Shabbos, but you can't say it's an unnecessary tircha. It's necessary because he won't have an opportunity after Shabbos. So Tashema, the Tani Rav Zuti, the Veid of Papi, another difference in the Girsa. Again, what was the Braisa that he had? Mafil Nadarim b'Shabbos l'tzaydach Shabbos. Same conclusion. In other words, l'tzaydach Shabbos in shloi l'tzaydach haShabbos loy. And indeed, so not only did we resolve the boya, but we resolved the underlying of the boya. Alma hafaras nadarim is not only on the calendar day, but miyoim liyoim is me'es le'es. And therefore, you have an opportunity to do it after Shabbos. And therefore, if it's not l'tzaydach Shabbos, it's taka a unnecessary tirchan Shabbos. Amar Ravashi, frek the Gemara, frek the Ravashi, v'ho anan tanan. Did we not learn in Mesachtas Nadarim, a Mishnah, Hafaras Nadarim is Kol Hayoim, and the word only. It's only Kol Hayoim. And the Yesh V'davar L'Hakol L'Hachmid. Even B'Kol Hayoim, there's a Kol Hayoim application that's more lenient, more time, because he does have until the end of the day at least. And then there is only that day, it can be very, very chamerdik. That means if the husband heard it a minute before Shkia, then the Kol Hayoim is Mamasha a moment. And the Mishnah explains, Ketzad, Nodra Leile Shabbos, Mefer Leile Shabbos, V'yema Shabbos, Achetechshach. Because that's called that day, that day. You know, it's even if it's only that day, it's not 24 hours, but you have that day. Nodra Im Chashecha, Mefer only, Achetechshach. And the Mishnah says, She'im lo yhafer mishachashecha, eino yachal lahafer, because the day that the husband has the right to be Mefer is only that calendar day. So which one is it? You're quoting me a braisa from Zuti, the Rav Zuti, the Rav Papi. So the Gemara says, indeed, it's a machlokes tanoim. We are looking for another braisa because since the only one that had the braisa above L'choira was Rav Zuti, the Rav Papi, sometimes you can say it's aray, it's not authentic. The Gemara says, no, it's taka machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, Faras Nadarim, first opinion is only Kol Hayoim, which is like the Mishnah Nadarim. However, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Rabbi Elazar, the Rabbi Shimon, they hold like the Braisa that Rav Zuti, the Veid of Papi had. No, it's Me'es Leis. Right, it said in the Mishnah, the Neshalom L'Nedarim. So Yiboilahu, another nuance. Even if the Neder is L'Tzaydach Shabbos, what happens if there was an opportunity for the Beis Din, for the person to go to a Beis Din before Shabbos, and they didn't do it? Right, similar to a whole different topic we had earlier, like for example, Rabbi Eliezer Demila, right? That you could have prepared the bris milah, that part could have been done before. Rabbi Akiva says if you could have done it before, you can't do it on Shabbos. What about this? Only then do we say that you didn't have time to be mated before Shabbos, and it is l'tzaydach Shabbos, so you can do it. But if you had time, to do it before Shabbos, even if it's l'tzaydach Shabbos, you cannot be mated neder. By Dilma, the first white line, I feel like tonight. So Tashema, from a story, clearly, they did involve themselves on Shabbos to be matir and neder. That was l'tzaydach Shabbos, the shadolei nidrei, and we know in that story, even though he did have time to go to a beis din beforehand, but since he didn't, and it was a neder concerning something that was for his tzadich Shabbos, yes, you can be matir the neder. And now we're going to the final case in the Mishnah. That shepakaku was amor b'tofiach, the kosher was amakei the begemi. What exactly happened? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. This is what happened. Kilkati katano hoysa bein shnei batim. There was a narrow alleyway, guys. This is already an intro to 8 of it. There was a narrow alleyway that was in between 2 homes. The Tuma hoysa sham. The Tuma hoysa sham. As we turn to the Amid Kuflan Zayin Amid Beis, just to clarify that there was a person that was about to pass away in the alleyway between 2 houses. They knew in a few moments he's going to pass away. Now, if he passes away, what were to happen? So like this, if there would be no roof over the alleyway, nothing would happen as far as Tumah is concerned. Problem was, top of the line, the gigis seduka munachas al gaban. There was a barrel that happened to have an opening in it. We'll get to the opening in a moment. There was a barrel that was on top. Now, what happens if you have a mace and over the mace there is an oil? Not only does all the tumah pass to everything else that's under that oil, tumas oil, furthermore, if in the walls of the houses or of one house, which is also aligned under the roof, there is a window, so the tumah doesn't only go down, but the tumah enters the window. If the window has a tefach size or more, and everything in that room would also become tamei b'tumas oil, and there were items in that home that no one wanted to become tamei. So what would you have to do? You have to stop. You have to shutter the window. If you shutter the window, then the tumah cannot enter. There's another nuance. What was the other nuance here? That the barrel that created the roof had an opening in it. It was seduka. And if the opening in the barrel would have been a tefach, then the tumah would go through the opening and there were bechlal not be tumas oil. It wouldn't go back down at all, not for anything under the oil, not for the opening in the walls of the house. So if the crack in the barrel was a tefach or more, they wouldn't have to shutter the window. If the crack in the barrel is not a tefach, then they would have to shutter the window. They were smart people. They didn't say, let's determine whether there's a crack in the barrel or not. No, that's the wrong order. Because by the time you do that and the person passes away, if you discover later there isn't a poiseach tefach in the barrel, then the tumah already entered the house. So the first thing that they did was, that's what we learned, that the first thing that they did was here, first they shuttered the window. Like this, even if they're going to discover that the oil is an oil, they already saved everything in the house. Now, in the Gavaldic details, just to know like this, that when do we say that if the window is shuttered, the tumah doesn't enter? That's only if the material of the shutter is not mekabel tumah. Now, a house, real estate, is never mekabel tumah. But a shutter that you take in and take off, even when it's on the house, doesn't become part of the house. If it becomes part of the house, you got to take a problem with binyan. However, if the material is earthenware, so you have earthenware keli, based on the rule that a klei cheres only becomes tamei migabon from the inside. So when they shuttered that window, they put the outer part of the keli facing the alleyway. So since now this keli itself does not become tamei, it saves, it protects the tumah from entering. So that's the first thing that they did. And now they're going to determine whether the oil is really an oil, whether the gig is seduka, only has a small sedak problem, whether it has a tefach sedak, b'chlal, you were mavatal the whole koyach of it being an oil. So how would they measure whether it has a tefach? A practical thing. They were unable, they didn't have the ladders like Iran has today. They didn't have these big ladders. So they would have to go on the roof, but how would they go over to the gigas? So what they did is that the kosher was hamakeda. They had a keli that was exactly a tefach wide. And they tied it with a gemi with this reed grass. And they were going to pick it up like a fishing rod. They would somehow pick it up and they would lower it into that hole. So from that, what do we see? So in the siyum that the Rebbe makes in Voschanon, Chelik Yud Dalid, Voschanon Aleph, the Rebbe asks a gavaldic question there. That the story, what happened was first they were poikik, then they were kosher, then they were moided. Because they started the window, they tied the makeda, and then they measured to see whether the hole has a tefach or not. Why does the Mishnah go out of the order? And even if you're going to say that it's not about the order of the story, but there's a rule that Tosfos gives us in Kedusha Daf Mem Aleph, that whenever the Mishnah says various words, the say that is zu, the ein sarach leimer zu, which means you say the bigger chiddush first. Now that you can be poikik is the biggest chiddush, because poikikin, the last place for this, can be done even shaloi l'tzoyrach mitzvah. But when it comes to the latter two, moeded in v'koshen, l'choura, kshira is connected to a kesher, is one of the lamatas malachas. Being mater kshira, l'choura is a bigger chiddush. Moeded to begin with is only an isser midrabanan, uvda the koil. It should be the least. So even the seder of chiddush, it should have been poikikin, kosher, and a moeded. So Al Pinigla, the Rebbe says something very important, and it's also based on Achsam Sofer, Gavaldik, that when you have an Isur Midrabanan, Uvda D'Choil, you can view that Isur Midrabanan more Chamor than something that is similar to an Isur Shabbos, because it's only similar to. It's al derech avadai midrabanan can be viewed halachically as something more chamur than a safek d'oraisa. So kshira is a problem because it's doimet to a kesher shel kayom. It's doimet to, but it's not the same. Medida, that once the Chachamim says you can't measure, it's even more chamur. And therefore, when the Mishnah is being mechadesh that l'tzoyrech mitzvah, you are allowed to do it. The seder of the bigger chiddush to the smaller chiddush is poikikin u'maydidin v'koishrin. And al pi Hasidus, the Rebbe says that the whole concept of Shabbos is there is first Friday night a Aliyah of the Olam, and that is poikik, the ruach tzefainis. It doesn't allow klipa to take hold. And Shabbos day, there is a concept of zah, which are the midos of Atzilus, that there is a direct flow from there into the world. That's the moedidin, the midas. And at the end of Shabbos, there is a yichud between the Aliyah of Malchus and Zah, and that Aliyah is what unites everything together, and that's the final thing, V'koshen, or in other words, as the Rebbe says, that the Masechta began by telling us V'dinim of Hoitzah Shabbos. And why did we begin with that? So Tosfos says, Malach Geruah, but I'll pick Pnimis Ranyanim, because really everything is in God's domain. If a person, God forbid, is Mechalel Shabbos, they are taking themselves out of the Reshus of Hashem, and they're saying, I'm in my own Reshus. So every violation of Shabbos is Beruchnius, an act of Hoitzah. What is the tikkun of that? What's the end of the Masechta? The end meaning after we keep it all, that we unite the whole world back into the Reshus of Hashem. We connect everything. We tie everything with godliness. So that's the goal of everything that we learn. That's the last thing. You're poikid away the klipa. And then you draw down a light from the midos of Atzilus, and the goal is to be kosher everything into godliness. And now we're going to conclude with a story. Ula, says the Gemara, Ikva lebeit Reish Galusa. Ula on Shabbos, for some reason, went to spend time in the house of the Reish Galusa. And when he went there, he saw that another Amoira, a friend of his, Rabba Barafuna, the Yosef, either Ba'avna, or we have here in the side, Ba'agana Damaya, or Ba'agana Gigis. He was sitting in a bathtub. And as we learned so many times together, that true, the Chachamim at a certain point made a gzeda, disallowing us ever to bathe in hot water on Shabbos unless it's Chami Teveria. Even though the waters were warm from before Shabbos, but Me'ikad Adin, you are allowed to bathe in cold waters. Our minig is not to do that. So you're not bathing, but you're allowed to do it. And he was bathing in a cold water tub. And while he's sitting there, the Kamashach, he's measuring whether it was tiles, he was doing an act of medida. And as we learned that if it's shaloi l'tzoyrech mitzvah, medida is also midrabanan, uvda d'choil. So when Ula saw him in there, amalei, ema da'amni rabbanan, taka, we learned in the mitzvah, in our Mishnah, that there is a heter for medida, it's only medida the mitzvah. But the lav mitzvah, mi amur. Amalei, to which Rabba Barafuna responds, Misasik Ba'alma, will leave the last word when we make the siyum, that I am not doing a malachas machsheves. If there is a purpose for which I am measuring, that's take uvda d'choil, it's awesome. But I am only distracting myself. Al pi halacha, when a person is in a bathtub when they're ungarbed, then there's an issue, their edva is exposed of thinking words of Torah. And if you want to make sure you want to direct your thoughts, it should not think about divrei Torah. How do you direct your thoughts? It's not so easy. But the way you do it is by giving something else for your mind to be focused on. So he was misasek in order not to think about divrei Torah, but there was no real purpose, direct purpose in his measurements. Like we learned, malachas machsheves is something that was completely permitted to be done on Shabbos. Just to connect this with the word of the Rebbe, that the ultimate goal of Shabbos is koshrin. Koshrin means is that we should become completely connected with godliness, and completely connected to godliness, going back to this whole topic of so we learned in the sugya that if you're a non-chassid, the isur midivrei Kabbalah is v'daber davar. But your machshavos can also be outside of godliness on Shabbos. You can have al pi halach. You can think about work, even your own work. But al pi midas hachasidus, even your thoughts should be, refrain your thoughts from your chefzecha. Refrain your thoughts. How do you refrain your thoughts? Midas hachasidus. That's the solution. Don't tell your thoughts. Don't think about A. Don't think about A. You know what you're going to do? You're going to think about your thinking and then not to think about A. The only way a person can direct their thoughts, that ever said this, Benegay other inyanim, a very important cloud. Don't fight darkness. You're going to lose. Add light. You know, we want to have a chassid has to keep, we have to be more the machshava connected to God, kosher to godliness, even on the level of machshava and fakert. In the world of Atzilus, machshava creates b'chulei. So how do you do that? By directing your thoughts. When you direct your thoughts or keep yourself occupied on something positive, that automatically prevents your mind from thinking that which you should not think about. Mazel tov for all of us that were assigned the Masechta. I would like to share that there's a special, there's something unique, at least for me, from Masechta Shabbos. This is for many, many years. This is the first time that I was very ill for a couple of weeks. I would like to thank again Rabbi Danny Fishman for taking over the shiur. But I was thinking that we say by the Mishnah on Shabbos that Shabbos im Elizoik, or the 4 Krevi Loving. Again, refraining, that we refrain from shouting out on Shabbos from illness. Shabbos itself brings it forth. That's something that certainly happened to me, for which I'm very grateful for. God willing, tomorrow we're going to start Masechtas Eruvin. Just to say one word about Masechtas Eruvin, that when it comes to the coming of Mashiach, and the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that there is an ani that's roichav ala chamoir. So there's a good word you say in the yeshiva that ani is Eruvin, Nida, and Yavamis, which are Masechtas that people wrongfully think are hard and they are afraid of learning. For that we say no, that when the Yidden are going to learn Eruvin and Nida and Yavamis, that's going to bring Mashiach. When we're going to have a shlemus and learning Kol HaTorah, so with tremendous joy, God willing, tomorrow, we're going to start Masechtas Ayin, Masechtas Eruvin, the Siyata D'Shmaya. Have a mazel tov, mazel tov.
Square.
Rabbi,
Mazel tov.
the word that you said from the Rebbe there at the end, I think it connects also to when you say in davening, Yinuchu Va Friday night and Yinuchu Va Shabbos day, and Yinuchu Vam at the end. That's that final connection, right?
We're having a siyum. We'll make a siyum Shabbos, but then we'll have a suda by the Horowitzes. So we have to figure out Shlem if you'll make the siyum there. Or Danny, whoever was, we'll figure out whoever. We'll make a few siyumim in Shul Shabbos and then start 7 p.m.
Are we zooming the Suda?
Sounds good.
Definitely zoom the Suda. And we'll zoom
with smell. I have a special Zoom with smell. You can smell it too.
Smell this one, good.
Rabbi, what's the kesher to Hadaras Netarim or Hafaras Nedarim and shutters in this Mishnah?
No connection, at least. Let's think about it. So when you'll make your siyum, you'll make a connection.
Thank you.
Good.
Eshar koach.